The Battle of Tsushima, fought between May 27 and May 28, 1905, was one of the most decisive and dramatic naval battles in history, marking the climax of the Russo-Japanese War and forever reshaping the balance of power in the Pacific. This clash pitted the Imperial Japanese Navy, led by the brilliant and methodical Admiral Tōgō Heihachirō, against the Russian Baltic Fleet, officially designated as the Second Pacific Squadron, under the command of Admiral Zinovy Rozhestvensky. The Russian fleet had embarked on an extraordinary and grueling voyage, traveling over 18,000 nautical miles from the Baltic Sea, around Africa, and across the Indian Ocean in an attempt to reinforce Russian forces in the Far East, following the humiliating loss of Port Arthur. However, by the time they reached the Tsushima Strait, separating Korea from Japan, the fleet was in a dire state. The journey had taken its toll, ships were worn down, coal supplies were low, morale was shattered, and the Russian sailors were exhausted from months at sea. Many of their vessels were outdated or poorly maintained, and their crews, mostly inexperienced conscripts, lacked adequate training. In contrast, the Japanese fleet was well-rested, well-supplied, and, most crucially, strategically positioned to intercept the Russians at the perfect moment. At dawn on May 27, Japanese scouts spotted the approaching Russian armada. Admiral Tōgō wasted no time and moved his forces into an optimal battle formation. He knew the Russians had little room for maneuver, boxed in by the geography of the strait, they would be forced to fight at a disadvantage. As the enemy drew closer, Tōgō executed a textbook-perfect naval maneuver that would become legendary, the crossing the T. By turning his fleet perpendicular to the oncoming Russian line, he ensured that his ships could unleash devastating broadsides, while the Russians could only fire with their forward-facing guns, severely limiting their firepower. As the battle commenced, the sea erupted with the roar of heavy artillery. Shells rained down like a relentless storm, and within the first few hours, the superior accuracy and rate of fire of Japanese gunners became evident. The Russian flagship, Knyaz Suvorov, was quickly crippled, engulfed in flames and unable to maintain command. Other battleships followed. Oslabia, riddled with armor-piercing shells, took on water rapidly before capsizing, while Borodino fought desperately but was ultimately sent to the depths after suffering multiple direct hits. The Russians attempted to regroup, but confusion and disorder spread through their lines. The Japanese had mastered long-range gunnery, thanks in part to their use of cutting-edge fire control techniques, and their 12-inch shells, loaded with Shermos explosive, inflicted catastrophic damage on the poorly protected Russian vessels. As night fell, the devastation only intensified. Japanese torpedo boats and destroyers, fast and agile, launched a relentless nocturnal assault, weaving through the wreckage and striking the vulnerable remnants of the Russian fleet with deadly precision. The darkness became a scene of horror for the Russians, ships ablaze, sailors leaping into the cold, merciless sea, and officers desperately trying to rally their men amid the chaos. Many Russian vessels attempted to flee, but the Japanese had anticipated this and had positioned their cruisers to intercept any stragglers. By the morning of May 28, it was clear that the Russian fleet had been utterly annihilated. Out of the 38 warships that had set out for battle, only a handful managed to escape, limping toward neutral ports or the distant shores of Vladivostok. Admiral Rozhestvensky, wounded and his fleet in ruins, was eventually captured by the Japanese. The final tally was staggering: over 5,000 Russian sailors had perished, another 6,000 were taken prisoner, and nearly the entire fleet had been lost. In contrast, the Japanese had suffered only light losses, with 3 small torpedo boats sunk and fewer than 120 casualties. The magnitude of the victory sent shockwaves around the world. For the first time in modern history, an Asian power had decisively defeated a European empire in a major naval engagement. The defeat at Tsushima shattered Russia's naval prestige and its ability to project power in the Pacific. It also forced Tsar Nicholas II to sue for peace, leading to the Treaty of Portsmouth, brokered by U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt, which granted Japan control over Korea and parts of Manchuria. Admiral Tōgō, now revered as Japan's Horatio Nelson, became a national hero, his name forever enshrined in military history. More than just a victory, Tsushima was a turning point in global affairs. It heralded Japan's arrival as a world power, demonstrated the obsolescence of outdated naval strategies, and foreshadowed the rise of fast, heavily armed battleships as the future of naval warfare. The echoes of Tsushima would be felt decades later, influencing the naval arms race that led to World War I and reshaping maritime doctrines for generations to come.